So pretty much the only thing I've ever learned in life is that combining things gives you other things. Like in cooking, for example, you can combine eggs and water and get watery eggs. Or combine salt and bread and you get salted bread. Now obviously I'm a pretty good cook, so you guys are gonna try to judge me and it's just not gonna work, but I'm just trying to prove a point here. So it pretty much comes as no surprise that you can actually combine trash, greed, and more trash, and you can get a wonderful creation known as an indie game that failed. Not just any indie game that failed, but one of my personal favorites, Nether. So what exactly is Nether, you may ask? It's probably better not to know, but since you're obviously watching this video, I guess I'm gonna tell you. Nether is a game that has been around since 2013. It is a game that had a ton of potential, and one that could have been something absolutely amazing. But unlike what should have happened, time has completely ruined Nether, instead of making it better. Problems with the developers, overall greed, hackers, and other bugs and issues caused the game to completely fail at becoming what it could have been. Today, I would say that over half of the player base are hackers, which is probably around 6 people, and that's a lot of people. So what exactly caused something with so much potential to just completely fail, and why did Nether become the disaster that it is today? We're going to talk about that in today's video, why Nether failed. Nether began back in 2013, and it was being developed by a studio known as Phosphor Games. Most of you probably haven't even heard of this studio, and it's because they're still fairly small and unknown. They did work with Epic Games on the Unreal Engine, but since that isn't exactly a way to get your game studio known, they needed to work on a project of their own. The first project that they worked on was actually a game for the Xbox 360 Kinect known as Kinect Adventures. I remember playing Kinect Adventures because it was bundled with my Kinect and it was pretty fun when I was like 10 years old, but that's it. But I can't blame Phosphor for the game not being all that, because honestly that was an issue with the Kinect itself and not just the game. All Kinect games sucked.
You like that? Yes, you do.
But anyways, after this, the studio made 3 different mobile games using the Unreal Engine, and I guess they did decent, but I'm not really into mobile gaming, so I can't really contribute to that. But from here, they decided that they wanted to branch out into the PC market, and they began work on Nether. Nether was still developed by this studio, but the company was being hired to make the game for someone else. So yes, Nether was in fact developed by them, but they didn't actually own the title, if that makes sense. Nether launched on Steam in 2013, and it was a super cool game. It was a post-apocalyptic survival game set in an area that sort of resembled Chicago. There was scavenging and crafting just like any other survival game, but this one actually had some differences. In this game, the main difference was the enemies that the player were up against. Now, these enemies were known as Nethers, and they had special perks and abilities that made them absolutely terrifying and hard to kill. Like for real though, these things actually terrified me when I was like 13, and young Robokast was not a fan of getting jump scared every 5 seconds. I mean, even watching videos of this game was terrifying because these Nethers would come out of nowhere and scare the crap out of you every single time. The map was pretty cool, and is still probably one of my favorite maps of any survival game I've ever seen. It's kinda rare to find a game that pulls off like the whole decayed urban look well, but this was definitely one of the few that actually did it right. You could enter most of the buildings and go down almost every single alleyway and crevice of the map. And the atmosphere made the enemies even scarier, and it just felt so right. Around the time of the launch, the game didn't do super bad, and had a peak of around 3,000 players. And yes, I realize that those aren't very good numbers for something just releasing, but you have to remember that this studio isn't even known at this point, and the only things they've ever developed haven't even been on PC. So I guess 3,000 players around launch isn't a super bad thing. Everything was pretty good around this time, but the new players had one major issue: lack of content. The basis and framework was laid out perfectly, but the studio really needed to expand on these things if they wanted to keep the small community active. But spoiler alert, it didn't really happen. The initial players had a ton of complaints about the lack of content, and even more would come in about some really irritating bugs and glitches that would appear. But since the game did have that lovely early access tag strapped on the front of it, people had to give it a break. I feel like a lot of games these days that come out in early access have this problem, and anytime issues pop up, the devs have to clarify to everyone that it's in early access and you have no reason to be saying these complaints. I mean, you basically agree that there would be problems when you agreed to purchase the early access game, am I right? When Nether launched in early access, it was October 29th, 2013. The first major update to the game came in November of that same year, and this update was mainly a patch that worked on fixing some of the major issues with the game, but nothing was really added. Another update came later that month, and this update was also pretty much just a big bug fix. In fact, the only new item that was added with both of these updates was actually a flashlight. I realized that game developers don't really need to focus on adding things when there's already a bunch of things that were broken, and plus it just came out. But when there's only a few things and most of them are broken, this is when an issue arises. Speaking of a few things, I gotta show you guys something. Now, remember how I said the game had a lack of content? Literally, in total, the game had 103 usable items. 103. That's it. If you want a comparison here, I used to be a part of some servers for a game called Unturned. The mod that these servers were running off of had almost 300 items. So a mod in a free-to-play game that was made by a group of volunteers had more items than the entire game of Nether. As time progressed, Nether began going in the right direction. A few new additions were being added here and there, and bugs were constantly being fixed. One of the most notable additions that I remember was one that came in December of 2013. This addition was called a blood meter, and it made the Nether smell you if you killed other players, because other players' blood would get on you and they would notice. This was actually a super cool and unique idea because it was a way to encourage more players to work together and PvP less. Because obviously if you PvP more, you're going to attract more Nethers and it just causes a big problem for you. Around this time, Nether had between 1 and 3,000 concurrent players, and it was in no means doing bad. More and more content was being added, and Nether started to pick up some steam. Bigger YouTubers began to cover the game, and people like Vanoss even posted a multi-part series on Nether. A lot of new players were joining and liking the game, but a problem was happening with some of the older players, similar to what happened with some other notable titles that I covered in previous videos. The devs were doing a good job in the short term of getting new people to play, but a lot of people were getting fed up with some underlying issues that were constantly irritating them. Terrible netcode caused a bunch of players to lag and made multiplayer a bit rough. Game-breaking glitches occurred and made people have to constantly restart, and performance was not very well optimized. But an even bigger issue was that there was no support for a 32-bit version of the game, which meant that people with a 32-bit operating system were not able to play at all, and it was obvious that it was affecting a lot of people. Comments would pop up all over the comments on the news page, and a lot of these comments would be complaints about the game forcing you to have a 64-bit operating system, and questions about why they couldn't add support for these other users. But all of the items and mechanics that were being put into Nether looked promising, and it made people have higher hopes for the other issues that were going on. I mean, if they have time to add dirt bikes, hang gliders, and tribes, I'm sure the devs could find a way to fix the issues, right? Well, I was one of those people who believed that, and what really happened may be a bit surprising. June 6, 2014, Nether launched out of early access. Like, there were barely any warnings, everything was still pretty much broken, and the community was in a very bad place, and next thing you know, boom, the game is out of early access. So as you can expect, many people weren't happy about this, and many people felt ripped off. When a game launches out of early access, developers are pretty much no longer required to do anything with it. So if they want to, they can just leave the community exactly how it is and walk away with a bunch of money in their pockets. Right after this official launch, the player counts exploded drastically. Just a few days after, they had hit over 10,000 players, and the community was more active than ever. It seemed like everything was going perfectly, but this launch would end up being Nether's biggest mistake to date. But this is where the story gets a little bit vague and confusing, and I'll explain why. So at some point around 2014, Phosphor Games stopped working on Nether. Remember, Nether wasn't a game that was owned by this studio, but they were the ones tasked with developing it. Now I can't seem to find any more information on when exactly this happened, but from what I can pull together, it seems like development changed around mid-2014. We do know that the owners of the game, the people who paid Phosphor Games, were unhappy with what was happening in Nether. So they basically fired Phosphor from working on the game and switched to a new dev known as Pure FPS. Right after the launch of Nether out of early access, everything went kind of quiet. The Nether Facebook page stopped posting, and nothing was heard from Phosphor Games. This whole situation went under the radar, and the changing of developers wasn't even publicly announced. Over the next few months, some really weird updates would come, and a lot of stuff would change. Gold and in-game currency was added, making some aspects of the game pay to win. And a lot of the major aspects of Nether were overhauled in a bad way. A lot of stuff changed super fast, and tons of players left the game because of the bad development practices that were going on. And the worst part about this was that Phosphor was taking a lot of the blame for these issues, because many people didn't even realize that they were no longer developing the game. Player counts plummeted, and by May of 2015, they were down into the range of 400 to 500. On September 25th, 2015, the first post on the Nether Facebook page since July of 2014 was posted, and it was an announcement that stated how the Nether servers would close the following day. People were super upset about this, and tons of people were raging at Pure FPS because of the bad business practices, and many people were demanding that they do the right thing and refund them their money. Since this game was pretty much only a multiplayer game, the developers removing the servers basically meant that they were taking the game right out of people's libraries. The Steam reviews instantly transitioned to overwhelmingly negative, and the last bit of players left the game, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Since this time, Nether has been picked up again by Phosphor Games, and stuff has begun to turn around. All of the pay-to-win features were removed, and the game was brought back to a previous version. A lot of work was done, and the game was brought up to a point where it was becoming good again. It had so much potential. But while this all sounds like an awesome plan that could help to save what was left of Nether, it didn't work. The game was already too far down the drain, and there was nothing that Phosphor could do to stop it. So is there a future for Nether? I really don't know, but I don't think so. It has had too long of a lifespan with too little happening, and the stuff that has happened has completely ruined the stuff that exists already. Now, I know that statement didn't make a lot of sense, but I think you guys have a feeling of what I'm talking about here. But anyways guys, that is going to be it for today's video, so I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did enjoy, feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.